a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
What we like to do each Wednesday, an update on what we call it's a commentary around the breaking news as it's coming out of Israel and the Middle East. And making sense of that, Mandy Worby is back with us. Hey, Mandy, welcome back.
Nice to be with you, Neil. How are you?
I'm really well.
Good.
Having some great conversations today. Hey, let's get our attention on, what most people might be thinking, seeing, images in the mainstream media, the topic of starvation in Gaza and the blame that the international media and there's protests that are happening, even on the Sydney Harbour Bridge on the weekend, all around starvation and Gaza. What are your impressions as to what's been breaking? Well,
I get into trouble because I break with the narrative that you hear in the mainstream media, the rabid hatred and accusation against Israel about starving the Gazans. It's still raging around the world, but a new image has just been released, and I showed you a picture of this image of the Hamas's official photographer. His name is Anas Ziad Fateh, and it's a photo of him staging a crowd of Gazans behind a metal barrier waving their buckets and bowls through it. Okay, so someone took a photo of Anas actually staging the photo. There's another image I showed you of a little girl, a toddler, crying while being forced to eat leaves. She's in a new outfit, she's clean, she's tidy, her skin is clear, she's not at all scrawny or malnourished, and she's a very healthy little girl in a new outfit, but she's being forced to eat leaves by either her parents or whoever is doing the videoing with a rock tied around her belly. And of course she's crying. She doesn't want to eat leaves, but for the sake of propaganda, that's what they're forcing her to do. There is starvation going on in Gaza, okay? There are some Gazans who aren't getting enough food, but that's because there are United Nations agencies who refuse to distribute a whole mountain of aid, 600 trucks fully laden, waiting to be distributed, thousands and thousands and thousands of pallets all sitting there waiting to be distributed. And the UN won't do it because they can't do it in connection with Hamas. Now, we talked about that last week. But the real starvation in Gaza is actually of the hostages. They're literally being starved to death in tunnels underground, and some of them being forced to dig their own graves. Now, shortly after the Western media released images of the starving children in Gaza, who then they had to very quickly retract those stories because they were false, the terrorists, Hamas, actually released video footage that they took of the barely living Israeli hostages. One young man, his name is Rom Breslavsky, I saw him in a video rolling on the floor in absolute agony because he's starving to death. He also has injuries from October 7 that were not treated while in Gaza. As a result, he can't walk. There's another young man, Evyatar David. He's seen only in shorts. He's literally skin and bone. He is underground in a tunnel that's only a little wider than himself, and he is literally being forced to dig a hole in the ground that he fears is going to be his grave. That's the real starvation in Gaza. And I am not seeing anybody in the anti-Israel protests speaking up or demanding the release of the hostages, or at the very least get them some food and some care. There's plenty of video and photos of the Hamas terrorists feasting on stolen aid in the tunnels. I included a couple of those for you to have a look at, some images. But the hostages themselves are starving to death, and no one is speaking about these war crimes.
War crimes, an interesting terminology, isn't it?
They are war crimes.
People are pointing at war crimes by Israel, but nobody holds the same standard to Hamas.
Not at all.
And that's a really, really challenging thing. Hey, let's talk about the thoughts of, what's come with the starvation. And even when we've seen this sort of march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and we've got our own national leaders here sort of talking about a Palestinian state and recognising a state of Palestine, all of those sorts of things. What are you thinking, Mandy Worby, around what sort of consequences there might be if there is the recognition of a Palestinian state?
Dreadful consequences. Okay, first of all the nations around the world who simply say that they recognise a Palestinian state doesn't miraculously result in the invention of a Palestinian state. It's a recognition of something that's not there. Okay, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he actually commented on this. He spoke on Fox and he said about nations that, recognise a Palestinian state, he said it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. First of all, none of these countries have the ability to create a state, a Palestinian state. There are no Palestinian state unless Israel agrees to it. And number two, they can't even tell you where this Palestinian state is. They can't tell you who will govern it. And three, he said it's counterproductive. And he's correct. Every time a national leader somewhere around the world condemns Israel and then demands that they create a Palestinian state or that they're going to officially recognise a Palestinian state, Hamas, who are the world's worst terrorist organisation in the world, thanks them for their support and then goes on to continue to refuse any kind of ceasefire negotiation. So all the nations of the world doing this are aligning with and encouraging Hamas terrorism to keep terrorising. Now, let me read to you the words of Hamas's one of their senior leaders. His name is Razi Hamed. This is exactly what he said word for word. He said, quote, "The recent wave of international recognition for a Palestinian state is a direct result of the October 7 operation. We've shown that defeating Israel is not beyond reach and our weapons stand as a proud emblem of Palestinian resistance and dignity," end quote. So they consider their terrorism to be dignified. Now, Hamas are very proud of their October 7 terrorist atrocity, and they have promised to repeat that event over and over and over again, and they are lauding these repeated recognitions of a Palestinian state, that they are directly connecting those recognitions to their acts of terrorism. They believe the world is in agreement with their acts of terrorism. So every single nation that recognises a Palestinian state is encouraging Hamas to commit acts of terror. They're going to reward them for it. I will say this, Neil, having Hamas thank you is not something to be proud of. It's not a badge of honour, quite the contrary.
And, when we see like 90,000 went across that Sydney Harbour Bridge on the weekend, that's in some sense a anti-Semitic statement, but it's a little bit like, and I'm just, what's going through my mind as you're sharing those things, a little bit like Aussies being proud of the October 7 terror attack.
It is.
Or
it's shocking.
Our national governmental leadership, our Prime Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, proud of the October 7 attack.
Our government has just said they're about to give $20 million for aid into Gaza. Do they not understand that any funds that go into Gaza go through the hands of Hamas? Australian taxpayers are now going to be funding Hamas to the tune of $20 million Australian. It doesn't go into the pockets of the Palestinians. It goes into Hamas accounts. They don't understand that. We're funding Hamas.
And the trouble is, Mandy, the world seems to be silent around what's happening, and the taking of sides is where people are at because of a propaganda war that's going on.
Right.
But this silence of people standing up for Israel, everyone seems to have turned against Israel.
Yeah, well, the Bible says that will happen. So, which tells me that God is in control of all this. So I don't lose hope. But I do feel frustrated. I do. I mean, the plight of the hostages is shocking. There's still 50 of them in there. 20 they believe are alive, and only barely. They're only barely alive, Neil. The Minister for their foreign minister in Israel, Gideon Saar, he went to the United Nations to confront them over this. He said, "I came to the United Nations today because our hostages are still being starved and tortured by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the dungeons of Gaza. They cannot be forgotten." He goes on to talk about the terrible conditions and that what is happening to these hostages is satanic. It's deliberate. He then said that the truth must be told about the international aid. He said Israel is facilitating huge amounts of aid into Gaza. No other country acts this way in war under difficult circumstances, and he's true. No other country feeds its sworn enemy while engaged in a war with them. Israel is the only one. And he called a spade a spade. He said the world has been turned upside down. There are countries that acted also in this building, he's talking about the UN, to pressure Israel instead of Hamas during sensitive days in negotiations by attacking Israel, campaigning against Israel, and their announcement to recognise a virtual Palestinian state. They gave Hamas free gifts and an incentive to continue this war. He's absolutely true. Every nation that says we're recognising a state in Palestine, Hamas goes, beauty, we're going to keep digging in our heels. We're not going to budge. And it's this. I'm sorry, but this has got to be laid at the feet of the nations of the world.
Benjamin Netanyahu in the media late yesterday and today, doubling down on efforts in talking about expanding efforts now. There's been all sorts of talk about the possibilities Israel actually taking over the Gaza Strip 100%. Any thought from you on that?
Well, see, when Hamas released the videos of their starving Israeli hostages, that really did something in the hearts of Israel and in their Prime Minister's cabinet. And there's absolutely no way on God's green earth that Israel is going to reward Hamas for their terrorism, regardless of what the rest of the world has said. And in fact, it'll have the opposite effect. It'll be tomorrow, probably. Well, Thursday Israel time, which is probably Friday Australia time, the Israeli Security Cabinet are going to meet to determine whether or not they will have no presence in Gaza, whether it be a little bit or whether they will have full military control over Gaza. Don't know what the end result of that will be. But there is a man who has been on Israeli television. His name is Amit Sigal, and in an interview in Israel on Israel TV, regarding what might be coming up in Gaza, he said this: entering areas where Israel previously avoided operating is possible. He said one of those areas will be camps in central Gaza. The second is Gaza City. There was some activity there 18 months ago. What it also means is moving to defeat Hamas even in areas where the hostages are held. He said, you may be wondering, is Israel definitely going to operate where there are hostages? He said, what I can say is that I'm quoting the official who says this: decisions will go to the cabinet this week for approval, but if the official is correct, it means that Israel is planning something the likes of which we haven't seen in the past 22 months. Israel is planning something. They want their people back. They're not going to reward Hamas. What it will look like, I don't know. But I can tell you this. In an online poll conducted on the Hebrew channel in Israel, 24,000 votes were cast in Israel in just over 2 hours, revealing that 81% of Israelis want the war to continue until Hamas is destroyed and the hostages are returned. That's 81%. That is a huge majority. 14% want the war to finish right now. 5% are undivided. It tells you where the Israeli public stand on this issue. They don't want war. They want the war to end, but they are not prepared to allow things to return to what they were on October 6th, knowing that Hamas has promised. In fact, they have guaranteed that they are going to repeat October 7 again and again and again and again forever until Israel is gone from the face of the earth. What that tells you is they are not in the least little bit interested in a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution, and it has to belong to them, and no Jews are allowed. That is where things stand, and Israel is not prepared to put up with that. They can't.
Well, Israel went to war with Hamas so that they could end the Hamas influence on the people of Gaza.
Sure,
and until those hostages are released, it does appear to be they're digging their heels in, and they're saying, well, we've started something here, we've said we're going to finish it, and now they've got to finish that.
That's right.
And they've got to actually,
and if the world really is interested in this war coming to an end, they need to be condemning Hamas and put the pressure on Hamas and let Israel get rid of Hamas once and for all. And then the war will end when they can bring their people home.
And Mandy, you've given me a whole bunch of photos here.
Yeah.
You've got these on some online resources.
Yep.
Is there some resource somewhere that listeners might be thinking, how do I get in behind the scenes? And, sometimes we talk about, Christians for Israel, but there's a whole lot of great Israel advocates.
I am subscribed to, I couldn't even give you a number of how many channels, resources and reporters and things that I'm connected to, that I'm scouring these hours and hours and hours before I get to work each day and then when I get from home. But just as at the top of my head, I would recommend honestreporting.com. honestreporting.com. It's one of the main ones I first became aware of, going back to the Second Intifada when Israel was libelled for killing a little Palestinian boy. And it turned out that the whole thing was a hoax. And there were other things as well about a Israeli IDF attacking a Palestinian on the Temple Mount. It turned out that, and there was a petrol station in the background of the photo. It turned out it wasn't on the Temple Mount because there's no petrol station on top of the Temple Mount, and it was an Israeli soldier who was in the face of an Israeli who'd just been attacked by Palestinians. He had blood all over him. He was screaming at him to get back so that the IDF could actually protect them. The whole thing was a lie, and that's what birthed honestreporting.com. Go there.
Mandy, Worby, always really amazing insights as you're monitoring things, and yes, an undeniable pro-Israel view. And of course, when you listen to Vision, you'll hear a pro-Israel view because there is a solidarity with God's chosen people, the people of Israel. There's a lot of biblical connection to all of that as well. Mandy, thanks so much again for great update today on 2020.
My pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.